3, 2, 1. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to see you, even though this is a little slightly unusual way of doing things. We have to thank Juniper so much for working hard to create this kind of a setup where we would be able to make this meeting possible. We know this isn't the usual kind of workshop arrangement. We're not sitting around a table. And since we're seated quite a ways from each other, keeping one's eye on everybody is going to be a little bit hard. We'd appreciate it if you would raise your hand to speak. That way I can recognize who wants to speak, and I'll know if there's two people that want to speak about something. I'll be able to make sure people get a chance to speak. As I said in our memo, we're not concerned about copy edits tonight. We're not concerned about what order things are in a section. Our goal is to get your feedback on all of the charter articles, at least as much as we can cover in a reasonable time. We like to do this and have our meeting in 2 hours. If we need to schedule another session, we can do that. And if you leave tonight and have a question or a thought that you didn't get a chance to ask or mention, you are always welcome to send us an email, make that list and send it to us, and so we can add it to our discussions that we have in the next meeting. We are sure that there's some part of the charters that hold more interest than others. Some people might not be really excited about the details in the wastewater department section, but we know that there are others that hold some interest, like Budget Committee, Personnel Board, and the Town Meetings section. And those definitely will be the focus of ongoing public gathering information sessions. So this isn't the one and only time to have a conversation, and because we have a lot we want to cover, I don't want to shut anything down, but please know that this is just an initial discussion with us, and there'll be more discussions about some of those, what we would call the more significant changes or not significant changes going forward when we have public information gathering sessions. So what we're going to do to try and keep us focused and have a bit of a structure is that we're actually going to go through the charter in order. And those issues or questions you may have can come up as we go through it. What we'll do is Lowry or I will give just a brief, not really an introduction, but tell you a little bit about what our approach is, or if there is something significant in there that you might want to pick up on. And then we'll open it up for your feedback. Our job up here tonight is to take good notes and to listen to what your issues are and any questions that you raise, so we can discuss them in our next meeting, give you feedback, and possibly if we need input from Bill Kelly on anything that's been raised, we can do that as well. So our job is to listen. We're not going to, try to spend an hour going back and forth on something. We want to hear what your concerns are. And we also want to make sure we leave some time at the end of the meeting to talk with you all about how public information meetings can go forward. That's going to be a really important part of our next step, because we need the citizen engagement, and we want to talk about what the changes are in the charter with the public, get their feedback, find out what they're interested in and concerned about. And so in this day of the pandemic and our limited gatherings, we need to have a conversation with you guys about that. So I want to save some time at the end of the meeting to do that, as well as this group needs to figure out our next scheduled meetings, because there is some competition for space coming up in November. So does everybody down there know everybody up here? I didn't think about that. I mean, I think I know everybody, but if we want to just say our names right around here and then you guys do the same thing, I don't know, Taylor, you may know everybody or may not. I don't know.
I think I do know everybody.
Well, maybe for the audience, we also, since we don't have nameplates, do you want to just state your name? We'll go around this way.
John French.
Jim Hurd.
Deb Dodge.
Laurie Sargent.
Karen Grove.
Bob Oxton.
Audrey Taylor.
Bob Falciani.
Taylor Benzie.
Mark Ratner.
Allison McKellar.
Great. Thank you. That way, the audience can tell who we are. So I'm just going to start us off, folks, with the first couple of articles in the charter. And Article 1 which denotes that this is the charter and also talks about the powers of the town. I would say even the first 3 articles that we did, we were really looking at organization and trying to find ways, if necessary, to clarify some language. But the newest thing in the first article is a suggestion of a charter review. As you all know, it's been 40 years since this has happened, and I think we recognize that maybe that's not an appropriate amount of time to go by. So this is some suggested language, and we've submitted it to Bill Kelly, and we'll be talking about his feedback for us on that in the next commission meeting. So that's to make sure that there's a way to do this more often than every 40 years. And it doesn't mean that there's a full revision, but this is the language is saying every 5th year, somebody needs to take a look to see if changes are necessary. And then there would be a second step. If necessary, the select board can then determine if some of them are just amendments or they need to form a commission. So this is new language. This is new. We just inserted this after our last meeting. And the other, it's not significant, but under section 4 in town meetings, we thought it might be a good idea to explain that the town meeting is the legislative body for the town. That really wasn't in the charter before. And it just clarifies what the role of the town meeting is.
Deb, you have a question?
Yes.
I don't know whether you would prefer that you get to a stopping point and then ask for questions, or if you want me to...
I have very few other things to say, so then I'll take some questions or comments.
Okay.
The other is just really sort of organization. We brought in citizens' initiative and referendum and petitions for the article on the warrant because it really wasn't together. Way in the back was a description of citizen initiative and referendum, but that's what's can be used to put things on the warrant, so we thought it made much more sense to have that all together. So that's why that appears to be a new section. And then E is a review of ordinances that did not exist. We're inserting language that we want to make sure that the town attorney reviews all warrants that are going forward, whether it's a citizen petition or it's one that's come through the process that the select board's putting on the warrant. And that really is sort of the nuts and bolts of what we looked at when we were doing the first article. So Allison, you had a question or comment?
Yes. So I have enjoyed the fact that your meetings have been on YouTube, and I haven't watched every single one, but I've watched a number of them. And I mean, just to start off with, the group of people that you all are, it continues to astound me, the amount of knowledge that is there, and just the fluency with which you can all talk about town government. And I think you're obviously a very small minority of the town in that sense, and the rest of us are becoming part of that minority as well the longer we stay involved. I wonder how many, I think we should try to keep in mind throughout this just how different the levels of knowledge are for the public, and it's something I'm becoming more and more conscious of. And the longer that I stay as part of the select board, I realize I actually have already started to lose perspective from time to time of how little the rest of the community understands, and that the more people that are moving here now, it seems to be hastening that process. I mean, even just the word select board is very confusing to many people. Just a brief comment. I did notice in I think it was your last meeting, there was mention of being able to provide an annotated version of this so that we can see very clearly what the changes are as opposed to what was language that's already in there. And I don't know if that exists somewhere, but I think that will be helpful for, I mean, I know it will be helpful for me and also just helpful for the general public. But I don't know, and I appreciated you saying also that it would be okay for us to write emails to you. I've struggled a little bit with this process because it kind of seemed that maybe individual select board comments like mine should wait until we had some kind of a workshop. I've been sort of begging for a workshop for a very long time, just because I wasn't sure what the appropriate way to share, comments is. And so being able to hear you say that tonight, that, it would be fine if we just want to submit some comments in writing for you to consider. And so I have a lot of comments and thoughts, and I'm actually really eager to be able to just kind of talk about it with you guys, because most people in this town cannot talk about town government with just this level that you guys can. And so it's very difficult to even ask for public input sometimes, because sometimes even when we ask people, okay, do you want to change the number of signatures required to get on the ballot from 75 to 25 in order to comply with state law? And everybody votes it down because they think, it might be something sneaky. So anyway, I'll try to reserve most of my comments for in writing, but I thought I heard mention at your last meeting also of the word maybe town council. Was there ever a discussion of changing the terms that we use for any of this? Even, the term town meeting is constantly very confusing to people. That I sometimes will just substitute in town council when I'm talking to people, just because I know they're not going to understand select board. I'm just wondering if you guys discussed that at all.
Changing terms versus changing forms of government. One has to be very careful because
Right.
town council is used in description of a different form of government. So casually calling the select board the town council has implications beyond making it more clear for somebody to understand exactly what it is.
Right.
I think in the public information process, it is going to be incumbent upon us to have information put out there that people can understand. So that is something we're going to need to do. A full annotated version of this with all of the strikeouts, the changes, and the new language would make it really impossible to read, but we can add more notes, certainly. And I can see a lot of this will have to be somewhat of a visual presentation, whether it's the PowerPoint and here's the language and here's what the change means. I mean, that's the kind of thing we'll have to do to make sure what we're talking about to the public is being absorbed. The other thing is that there's a place for the town, the select board, and the town office to educate people as they become registered voters in the town of Camden. Maine Municipal Association has a guide to town meeting form of government that talks about you as a citizen and what you can do in a town meeting. And that's something the select board could look at, put together your own version, and that could be something that goes out all the time to a new resident and a new voter. So there are ways to do that without trying to do the education completely in a charter, because you don't want to encumber the charter necessarily. We do have a glossary in the back, but I think there are other ways of educating the public other than just doing it in the charter. Karen?
Yeah, and further to that, in the last meeting, we discussed just that thing towards the end of the meeting. We talked about educating the public and then doing a survey, and it was multi-tiered. We talked about bringing in the high school kids that are voting age or just below voting age that are coming up. We talked about getting out there in the newspaper and all the different vehicles that are available to us. But that's kind of outside of the charter itself, but we have discussed it, and I think we're a little further down the road than I thought we were on that.
And John, did you hand
I
up?
was just going to build on what Karen said. We did have quite a struggle figuring out how to get it out to the people, which is all of you have, and and all of us have for years, is get the information out there so people understand it and know where to find it. So I think we talked quite at length at the last meeting about better ways to reach out to the people and get it out there. And we were hitting the same wall, it seems like, every year. And so there's got to be a different method out there. We're willing to try anything.
Right. And I heard that discussion. And, you know, it's something that I've been really excited about. I lived in Camden most of my life, learned not until, you know, a few years ago, really, 6 years ago or something, really the basics of town government, and why that managed to escape me all throughout the Camden school system. You know, I'm a product of the larger problem, for sure. And it is exciting to learn a little bit, and then you start thinking, oh, if we could just teach everybody how to do this. Although there's the other aspect of it, is starting to realize that for the same reason we have trouble attracting people to the fire department, you know, as volunteer firefighters or volunteers for other things, there are so many things competing for people's time and attention, politically and otherwise, that I spend a lot of time talking to high school students, and a lot of them just say, we've got other things to worry about. The learning curve necessary to get to the point where you can understand why zoning matters to humanity and for all these reasons, and affordable housing and density and climate change, and the learning curve is just very steep. And I am not certain that we are ever going to get to the point where enough people want to go through that, just like we don't, the idea of having all the citizens understand state budgets and all the, state laws well enough that we could all really know the details. I wonder if at any point a more existential conversation might happen about whether this form of government is actually working for us and will in the long term.
That's a little separate from the other things you were saying, and it seems to me that a separate discussion, and even it seems to me a select board role to play, how do we encourage and how do we get the community educated? I think that's separate from this, even though we have to do some education as far as promoting this or getting people to understand. But I think that's, the issues you've raised are issues that are sort of outside the charter.
No, the question is, would it ever make sense to look at a more representative form of democracy than such a direct democracy, a more council? How much did you wrestle with the idea of is a council form of government more appropriate for Camden at this point in time? I do not have a strong opinion. I'm starting to see it differently than I did before, and I just wonder if that,
We've had that conversation numerous times. Certainly when we first started the charter, that was one of the very earliest conversations we've had, and we've had it again. We had it as recently as a couple of weeks ago. We talked about hybrid form, where it's council and town meeting, town council, town meeting, and town manager. So that has been talked about, and that's another one of the subjects that has to happen in a public information gathering session, to have that conversation with the citizens here, to say this is what a town meeting form of government it is, and here are the options. And so the consensus has been, if I'm not correct, that we're not recommending a change at this point, but we haven't had the input from the citizenry.
okay.
And there are those other forms of government out there, and I think one would need to, put the pros and cons out there, which would be something we would need to do of each one of those forms of government.
And this is one of the reasons why we put in this 5-year review, is it seems, our sense is that change is coming a little quicker than it used to come. And that if you have a review every 5 years, then maybe you'll be able to learn about some of those things in their infancy, and perhaps, or perhaps not, incorporate them into town government. But it would give us a chance to think about it, respond to it, rather than saying, in 40 years from now, when Bob's still on the committee, and he says, gee whiz, I remember back in 2021 when we talked about whatever. That won't be helpful in 2061.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why the 5-year thing is in there, is to always keep these things ahead of us so we can be thinking about them, what might be better, what might not be better. Just a an administrative thing on any of you that want to send emails in. We'd be glad to receive them, but please send them to Janice, and then Janice will distribute them to all of us.
And actually, I would prefer if you have, I don't know if you have time in a meeting for you to collect them and we get them. It would be nice not to get an email from Allison that has 3 things and an email from Audra that has 10, and then Allison sends us another one and Taylor sends us one. It would be nice, if it's possible, for those to come sort of at once so we can look at them and then we can designate how we're going to get back to, how we're going to handle the discussion on it. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like that first list you gave us that we've already gone through and is a lot of which has been incorporated in these changes. It was helpful to have one list. It was helpful to have one list from Audra, as opposed to one here and one there when a light bulb goes on. Karen?
Yeah, not to keep going too far off message on this charter that we're looking at, but my understanding when we had our discussion last time we met, we were really taking this whole idea of changes in small bites as far as educating the public. And the bite we were looking at was getting people to town meeting and educating them about what town meeting is and how important it is for them to show up, because it's their money we're spending and they're not telling us whether they like that or not. So that, as I said, not to go too far off message here, but.
I think we hear you. I think we got where you're going to. Do other of you out there have the same concern and want to make sure that's addressed?
I mean, I guess that's the whole point of putting a charter commission together, is that you would look at some of the really difficult questions about how we organize ourselves as a town.
And I think that's what we've been doing. I think that's what we've been doing. It might not come up with a result that pleases everybody, but our recommendation so far, before we do the other public input, is sticking with this so far. But that doesn't mean that it won't change. Yes, Taylor?
No, I agree with Allison in a sense. I think it's like question number 1, I think, is, is the select board, town meeting, town manager form of government working for us as well as it did when it was first incorporated, realizing that the world has changed significantly. I also don't have a strong opinion either way, because I see pros and cons in both types of government. I think the idea that there is real buy-in for the regular citizen to show up and have real input, meaningful input, is theoretically a good thing, but Karen said it well, like, people just don't show up. I think, seeing, Allison found an article from the mid-'80s that talked about how this was a problem back then, that maybe only 40 or 50 people would show up to town meeting regularly, and that still is the case. So I think if we're being realistic, the idea that if this has been going on for decades, that it's just hard to get people involved in this sense, whether because they don't want to or don't have time or who knows what it is. I think, realistically, are we going to see a massive change in that? Probably not. Certainly the education would be helpful, but I'd be very interested to hear this discussion happen more with those public input sessions.
Yep.
Because I think that there will probably be a bunch of, if we get more people outside of that minority who are well informed about how our town government works, I'd be curious to hear how many people are surprised that we have this form of government to begin with and that it actually does work this way.
Exactly.
And see where the discussion goes from there. But I think it's
Right.
important that it stays an open-ended question, at least for the short term.
Sure.
Thank you.
John, you raised your hand?
Well, I just want to say, this has been the question forever. We've all here, I think every one of us except for Bob and Laura have been on the board, and we all understand, but we all been involved with one form or another with the town. Bob, the fire chief, Laura, with the planning board for years, so everybody knows the procedures. Everybody's been frustrated by the lack of participation from people at the town meeting, public hearings, whatever it is. But I've seen over the years that most people don't get engaged unless it affects their neighborhood, their home, or their family. And I've seen this room full for one item for halfway through town meeting, and 200 people get up and leave with most of the meeting left to go, but they've settled what they wanted, that one agenda item. That's the problem. And I don't care if you have a council or you have a town meeting, you're still going to have that same lack of interest, I think. Because people just don't need to, they don't want to be part of it unless they need to be. As long as things go by and the town's treated in a good way and it's conservatively run and it's physically strong and the streets are fixed and plowed and everything else is done, they're going to be happy. But that's the big thing. I mean, I'd love to see this room. I've said this many times. I think you
Oh,
were the
yeah.
one.
No, we don't disagree, I don't think at all.
No, I
You know,
don't,
but
I don't
it's-
think we do, and I think this is one of those discussions that is an ongoing discussion and will be as we do more session.
But I think the other thing is, it's becoming time to put a lot more on the secret ballot because of participation. That's, gonna be, so you get more people to make a decision. I mean, right now, we got, what is it, average 50 to 100 people for, and a lot of points, there's staff members from the town that are here, so the opportunity's there to do some different things, but I just, you're not gonna change people's minds. I'm sorry, I spoke.
There are options within the town meeting form
Yeah.
of government to make some of this happen. Mark, you had your hand up a couple of times.
Yes, I have to agree with John about the attendance and putting things on the secret ballot. One of the things I was interested in this year is how the ballot was going to be voted on with things that were never there before on this year because of the pandemic. And the thing I was most interested in is how the budget was going to be okay. Were people going to vote it down? Were they going to vote it up? And I think we had a 92% positive vote on the budget, which I thought was very interesting. I think it indicates that a lot of people are very happy with what's going on. And when you get that, they're not going to come out. Like John said, they're going to come out when they're unhappy. Now, one of the things that I've seen, I've been volunteering for different things for the last 30 plus years. And I've noticed that in that time, and John can say the same thing about the fire department, in that time, as people now have 2 household careers and way busier and multiple jobs, there is not the time to volunteer for things that there used to be. Places that used to have, I used to work on a volunteer search and rescue team in Los Angeles, and where we used to have 30 and 40 members, that went through the whole application process and did everything. We were down at some points to 9 and 10. And I know the fire department here has gone through the same problem. And that's one thing we need to be aware of is, it takes sort of a special person to give up their family and give up the time and come and do this. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. And you also notice that the relative age of most of the people tends to be older. It's hard to get younger people. We're very fortunate to have Deb and Allison and
these
Audra
young
and
people.
Taylor here. So, so we have to think about those things. I don't know how you can engage people except when they're unhappy about something. That's when they turn out.
Well, and I think that in itself is a very worthwhile discussion. But to let you know, there are a number of town meeting select board forms of government, a number of towns that do always vote the budget on the ballot. I don't recommend doing it the way York does. York's ballot was 11 pages long because they put everything in the budget on their ballot, which is like extraordinarily burdensome, particularly for the people that have to process them. But there are many towns that have town meeting form of government with the budget, and we did it this year, and it's done in other places. It changes a little bit about what you have to do. You have to make sure you have good public meetings and, for people to come and listen and raise their concerns and questions before the select board and budget committee finalize a budget. But yes, Bob?
Yeah, I think all the points well taken, but the dynamics of what is going on is not easily educated or changed. So when we do have, you all do have, and I think we've discussed with this, a few of you, an opportunity to better publicize the challenges of the town management form of government. That is part of education. We've seen it, and we're most sensitized to it because of the last, 4 months with this issue of the pandemic. We're operating with one hand tied behind the back because of the town management form of government. It's another issue.
Not
But-
town management, town meeting. 'Cause
town
management
town-
means like you're pointing at Audra here.
No, not town management.
If only we didn't have a town manager, we'd be.
We'd be all set. No, but I think that we do need probability that the town meeting form of government will endure for the next 30 years is limited. And education starts at some point. A proactive education of the public starts now. And that's an advantage of having this charter commission, and I think you all know that. We just have to talk about how we get this information, one, to the public about the challenges, what we're doing about it. And as it relates to, you all know this, when I review the charter in its preliminary format right now, I look at how is it becoming better or more effective so that we can manage the town more effectively, because we're not. As I read some Ellsmith's charter comments I'll make later, we're already in violation of some of these elements. We're in violation because of this year in the pandemic, of course, special situation. But we have a strong eye to less restrictive, more procedurally driven. And that's where all my comments always come from.
There are ways to handle emergency situations that is not in our charter, but I have found in other town meeting form of government charters that we can actually have Bill Kelly take a look at, where you have more authority than you have now when it's a case of public health, public emergency, or whatever. There is at least one that I found, charter, that has a more flexible method for the select board and town manager, particularly when it comes to an emergency appropriation. So there's some solutions out there that we just need to find and sort of get sanctified, from our legal standpoint. Yeah, Jim.
Bob, is is the word frustration with the process have to do with the form of government, or is it just governing in general?
It's probably both, but the town meeting form is highly restricted by design. It presumes, by definition, public input. And to points Allison made earlier, and Taylor and John, we ain't getting it. This is just a fact of life, and will we get it? I'm highly suspicious because of the points that Mark made about people, busy with lives and just can't get to this, and I don't blame them. So it bodes for a process going forward beyond this commission to continue to educate, start here, to educate the public as to the challenges of how the town meeting is highly restrictive in a society where everything moves quickly, decisions are made quickly, information flows quickly, but yet I can tell you a number of initiatives that we've all been involved in that are 1-2 years old and finally got implemented, not to mention how many years it took to pave a parking lot. It just lists and lists this, and yes, it is frustrating. I judge what I do by what I get done. I got to be careful with that with the town meeting form of government.
What I'd like to do is move away from this, because this is a discussion that could go on all evening, and we have other things we want to cover. I think we've heard. If you have another point this quick, Taylor, that you'd like to make?
Very quick. The only thing I was going to leave us with is that I think the big question moving forward, particularly for public input, is the select board form of government the most efficient way for the town of Camden to run? I think that's the question to be put to people, understanding how it works, and then that will lead us into maybe some conversation. Thanks.
Allison, you have anything new you want to say? Because if it's not new, it's time to move on.
It is new, very quickly, that it doesn't come down to me as just the budget. It's the being more thoughtful, a way to be more thoughtful about the types of questions that we put out to the whole public. Because when you ask people so many questions about all of these little things, they don't know which things demand a lot of their time or which things it actually matters that they learn about. And so I do not feel that there's a lack of public input or public engagement at all. I get so much interest from people on all kinds of topics, but when it actually boils down to one little thing, one change in the zoning ordinance, they don't want to be involved a lot of the time, from my perspective, in that level of detail. And so just any way to be more flexible, and which, you're right, it does get back to the, to the form of government.
Deb?
That's it.
Yes, Karen?
I'd like to suggest, because it looks like there's a lot of interest here, that we form some sort of committee or commission to get together and craft something that we can actually use and put out to the public, questions, answers, education, and all of that, that we do it as a committee on another time, another night, if you all have time.
That's kind of like what I was saying earlier. I think it needs to start with them, as far as the education, whether it's another group or whether it's them,
Yeah, I would volunteer for a group like that.
educating.
Absolutely,
I know
yeah.
it is on the new town website. There is a small paragraph about the town government on the new town website. But there needs to be more of that, and there's a way to do that outside of this process of discussing which form of government we should be. The public needs to be educated about what it's got. Mark, one last comment about this, and we'd like to move on.
Actually, I want to say two different things. Number one, I do want to hear what Allison's comments are tonight, because I'm here to listen and hear everything, and I don't want to be restricted to emails, because I think this is something that people will see more than just being able to read something later on that's restricted to who receives it. And number two, to start off something, Article 1, Powers of the Town, Section 1, Incorporation, the first three words, whereas the plantation of Camden. One of the things that stands out to me is the word plantation. We've seen in the world these days in this country that that's a word that is outdated and is being taken out of descriptions for towns and stuff because of the meaning it has for a lot of people. And I don't know if we need to keep it in there, but if we don't, I'd like to see that changed.
But Mark, that's the historically correct
Right.
way the Camden
That's-
was
I-
formed. We're
that-
not
and that's-
currently a
That's what it
plantation.
was called.
That's what I don't know, that's what I'm asking
Yeah.
about.
That
It was
is- that's
a
the history.
plantation, the plantation of Camden was the legal designation
Okay.
back
that's-
then. It's
I-
not now.
I understand it's not now, I was not aware of that, that's one of the
And there
reasons
are
I brought
also
it up.
Places all over Maine that are called plantations still,
Okay,
Especially northern.
unincorporated.
I'm here to ask
Northern Maine,
questions,
there's
and
tons of
you've answered my question.
Allison, your list, maybe we can get to that at the end as we make a little bit more progress. Do you have,
It's not totally a list, I wouldn't say. A lot of it is I have not demands, but thoughts, and
well,
so,
will they be appropriate to sections as we go forward?
yeah. I
So
don't
you don't want to
feel-
hear them all at once. If
There's-
they're
yeah.
appropriate, mention them as we go through further articles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's no way to fit all this into one night, so you've got to stop.
Well, you can
Somewhere.
certainly
Yeah.
share your list of questions with the whole select board at the same time you send it to Janice to be sent out to us.
Yeah, and maybe
On
it
anything.
makes sense for the select board to talk about it sometime on an agenda or what. I'm fine with lots of different avenues.
That's
so
great.
I don't
Okay.
feel restricted. Thanks.
Mark, if you're interested in the land history of this area, there's a book called, I think it's called The Liberty Men and the Great Proprietors, which traces the ownership of land back to the 1600s, the 1500s. And
Or
how,
Camden.
and it's set in Camden, Rockland area.
I think I've heard of that book.
It is a grind to read. It's like 450 pages. And, I mean, I could read 3 or 4 pages at once, and that was enough. I was filled. I mean, it has deed references. You'll recognize people's names, people who still live here. But it talks about how all these lands came to be accumulated and then divided up and then redivided. It's really a fascinating history of the area, if you're looking for that kind of thing.
What's the name of it
I think
again?
it's the Liberty Men and the Great Proprietors.
Yeah, they
Maybe
were
we need
called
something about the
proprietors.
indigenous history of the area. That would be a pretty progressive thing to add in here, but
Well, but
I think
the
go
the
talk to
charter
Camden
does not
Library.
exist to provide the history of Camden. That's not its purpose.
Right.
Its purpose is to act like a constitution for Camden, saying these are the basic laws. There's lots of stuff to be filled in as we go along by all the various groups, but this is the basic structure for how we want to have the town governed.
Okey doke. We can talk about select board next. We haven't made any substantive changes in duties, responsibilities. We tried to organize it a little bit differently. I think the major change, as far as terms is concerned, it really isn't a term limit, but it's 3 consecutive 3 years with a year off before signing up again. And we had a long discussion way back when about this, because we weren't really wanting to cut off anybody from serving, but we wanted the opportunity for there to be a break to encourage new blood, because we do value institutional memory is terribly important in a lot of these committees. So, 9 years, some time off, come on back is sort of what the theory is on that. And we talked about whether it should be shorter, longer, a finite end, and this is, it's not uncommon for some towns to have this. Were you raising your hand or just scratching your head?
I'm just listening to you,
Okay.
Deb.
Taylor, I think you had your hand up.
I was just gonna say, I don't have it's something that I wanted to see in here, and I didn't have a specific number in mind ahead of you doing it, but I was happy with the way that you put it in the charter. It's the way it is now.
Allison?
I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but my gut, I might be able to be convinced otherwise, but I tend to, I don't like it, because when I don't think that the right way to encourage new blood is with a void. People should, I look at John French is of course the first thing that comes to mind when, I think about John French.
Oh,
when I first, as soon as I think about, okay, well, who would that have prevented? I do not believe the town of Camden would be better off if John had been forced to stop after 9 years. And I also
Then he
think
can come back.
I know, but you might not have gotten him back if you were. I just, if the purpose is to encourage new blood, there's something wrong with that. Democracy is supposed to be competitive. People are supposed to be brave and, do their best. And if you don't like what your elected representative is doing, even though in this case we really have almost no power, then there should be a competitive race. And I think it does take a long time to learn. It is a problem if every person on there has been there a really long time, I guess. But the larger problem is that nobody else wants to get involved. And I think that's changing. We're having more competitive races, and I think that's good for Camden. And I don't know. I think that, and I know this isn't about John, but
No.
that contribution to the town has been extraordinary, and that he also created, partially I think probably because he had been there for so long, created a very welcoming atmosphere for somebody like me to feel like I could run. And I don't know, I just think sometimes you get better and better over time, and it makes me very nervous to add this.
Any other thoughts out there? Mark?
I have a comment. I'm totally against it, and it may just because if this were to go into effect, I would be the next person affected if I decided to, after 3 terms. If I wanted to run for a 3rd term, I would be the first person to come up for a 4th term. A couple reasons I'm against it is I don't believe you need to fix something that's not broken. John had 7 terms as select person, is that correct, John?
I think so.
Jim, how many terms did you have?
2?
Deb?
Just one.
Karen?
2.5.
2.5. So I've asked John this a couple of times. How many people does he know that ran more than 3 terms? And he couldn't remember anything. And,
That's, if
but
I may, that's the thing, you look at the average from all the select boards over the years, most of them are 2, and 3 is out, once in a while. But-
so I think it's not broken, and I think that the great thing about having John on the board is the wealth of knowledge. We go through generational changes where knowledge disappears. For my rescue team in Los Angeles, the people that started are going away, and the new people are losing a wealth of knowledge that will impact the work that they do for years to come. And I think, it takes at least a year when you join the board to get up to speed and to learn things. So you're cutting it off. And that, so one, I don't think it's necessary because I don't think it's broken. But two, have people step down for a year and then if they want to come back. What that does then is they most likely, if they want to come back, they're going to have to run against the people they worked with. And I don't think that's a very positive thing to do. Because it may not necessarily be a thing open, and if you want to come back, it's like, oh gosh, I have to run against Allison. I don't want to run against Allison, or I don't want to run against Taylor, because I respect the work they do. I don't think it's a good system.
Bob?
Well, similar vein, I look at it and say, if you put it in there, it's not going to be a big problem because we're having trouble recruiting people to do anything in the town. But on the other hand, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, applies here. We're going to have a real challenge getting people to stay on board for 9 years or to run, period. Anything that detracts from that, and if a person detracting from that is taking a year off, they're not coming back.
Yeah, they're not coming back.
One of the, I think one of the thought processes we used when we were considering this as a change in language was looking at the federal level, where there are senators and congresspeople who've been there for a very long time.
Yep.
40, 50 years, some of them. And there was a real sense that they've become too stagnant. They're no longer responsive or understanding of newer, younger ideas. And they have become so in place with their power that they're almost impossible to dislodge. Now, because of this nature being essentially largely an unpaid position and you don't have a whole lot of authority, we don't have those kind of things going on. But we thought that one thing that it would do was to provide a way for younger, newer people in town to become involved in the government because there was going to be an opening. Oh, we're not going to run against those two folks because they've both been here for however many terms, therefore it would be impossible for us to win, so we're not going to participate. I would think it'd be far better to say, okay, if we've had somebody here for 3 terms, and as John says, I don't know, maybe once every 15 or 20 years, we're going to get somebody that's been here for that long, that it would create an opening for somebody with newer, younger, more energetic ideas possibly to come in and serve. But it sounds like you don't think that's the case.
Somebody, if you care enough, you have to really care and a lot to want to run for this because it's a huge amount of work. And if you don't care enough to be willing to run against somebody, then you probably don't, if that level of confrontation makes somebody afraid, then they shouldn't be on the select board because you'll just be eaten alive as soon as you upset your neighbor the first time. I mean, I ran against Don White without, fear. I think that younger people are less afraid of rocking the boat. And that, I don't know, I just don't see a benefit, but.
Well, it's not every town has term limits or some version of term limits. Some do, some have ones very similar to this. Some we saw had 2 3-year terms and a year off and then coming. So this isn't, pulled out of the air with nobody else trying it and doing it. But I think we hear what your point of view is.
Okay.
Let's see, there are a couple of other things we did in here. One is in the section called appointments. We actually added language.
What page you on?
I'm on page, I put the page on page 4, B, about advisory committees. Making sure that it's clear that you had the power to create advisory committees and appoint them. But also, to make sure that there was some structure around that committee, what they're responsible, they know that they have responsibilities, that they're giving something substantive that tells them why they're being created. So outline the purpose, responsibilities, qualifications, and that a liaison would be assigned to that, that committee, and that you may discontinue any advisory committee after a public hearing. So if you've created it because there's a need, and then that need goes away, let's say you create a committee to write how to participate in town meeting form of government. When that's done and accomplished, you just have a public hearing and you dismiss the committee. I mean, there may be other reasons you might need to dismiss a committee, that you don't just, do it without a public hearing. So this just gives you more language, we felt, to empower you to do it, but also what needed to go along with the creation of a committee. And,
Allison has a question.
oh, sorry.
The committee structure is probably too big of a subject for tonight. I don't see anything terribly problematic here, except for, and I hadn't seen it before, but did you say that the word liaison that's in there?
And shall appoint a liaison from the select board.
So that to me is sometimes not problematic, but has been problematic in the past. The responsibility of being a liaison. I remember Barbara Dyer told me one time when we were just getting to know each other, and she talked about why she only stayed on the select board for one term, and she said the first thing they do is they make you sign up for 5 committees, and before you know it, it's like a full-time job. And I think at the time I was like, oh, I love the committees. It's so fun, now that I'm on the select board. And it sometimes feels like more like you're a reporting secretary for the committee. And it also becomes very uncomfortable when we all sort of choose committees that deal with issues that we feel passionate about maybe or have a lot of interest in. And so what I've found is that I end up on, the Historic Resources Committee and I started off on the Conservation Commission. That's part of another issue we're having. But, or the Pathways Committee, and you can end up being, I am not a representative voice for the whole select board sometimes. And so I get excited about being part of that and strategizing, but then I'm asked for input, as if I'm saying this is the will of the select board, and then you come back and I felt that in other times too with committees that have had, have a different liaison, maybe that, well, hold on, it's hard for us all to necessarily be so much on the same page that you feel comfortable with what the designated liaison is going to be doing. And we have made a little bit of an effort to move things around and to kind of free up that sense of, like, you're assigned to this committee. Some of us have more time than others to participate in all of these meetings. But I would be reluctant to have language in the charter that specifies that you will be assigned a liaison from the select board, because it's hard to fulfill those, without defining necessarily the duties of the liaison.
Well, that would be a policy, I would think that the select board,
They're
policy, the select
kind
board
of a
work on.
management
John actually had
process.
his hand up to respond, didn't
Well, first place, these committees are all the discretion of the select board.
he? Right.
They have been and will be forever. But as far as the liaison, I think the liaison always was a person that represented from the select board, but not representing the select board's views, but listening to the committee and reporting back to the select board what the committee is talking about.
That's
And
the
then
role.
and also the liaison is not a voting, or unless they're asked by the chair or whoever that committee if they want to participate in a particular meeting, but they're not supposed to be directing the meetings, they're directing the discussion. So
It's-
that was always the way, but but it's all
It's
up
a
to the
huge
select
amount
board.
of
You
time.
guys set these things up, you can do whatever you want with them. I don't have a problem with taking a liaison out of,
But there's a
Yeah.
simple solution to that.
Right.
Take out the word shall, and you put in may, and it's the decision when you form a committee
Exactly.
about whether you think this committee needs a liaison.
Right.
Perfect.
Yep.
Love
That's a
it.
simple solution.
Yes, and just
But-
FYI, there is a policy by the select board on committees, and it does talk about the role of the liaison versus, as John just described it.
So we'll just change the word from shall
Yep,
to
to
may,
may.
and then it's at your discretion.
I think
We
there's
also now have
another
live
thing
streaming
to-
of all the committee meetings, which
Yeah,
helps
exactly.
immensely, so.
Could I
Audra?
also recommend that when you have the ability, you don't require a public hearing? And instead make it like, I don't know, a public hearing has a very specific statutory meaning and
Oh.
requirement.
Good point.
And it's really not very conducive to good public engagement, and it just makes us pay money to newspapers to notice something unnecessarily.
Call it a public discussion.
You know, we could say during a public meeting or something like that.
During a
Yeah,
public meeting.
Yeah, anything more vague, I think, would be great.
One
whenever you
of the, one
can
of
do
the techniques we've used in the past, too, to avoid the administrative weight of having a committee is to form working groups. And working groups typically are approved by the select board for very specific tasks. You know, we want the working group to study whether or not we have enough parking spaces on Mechanic Street or something like that. And it's a short-term group that gets together, there's no liaison, here's the information we would like you folks to consider, and come back to us in a month and a half with some recommendations. And I don't know if you still do that or not, but that's worked well in the past for these less formal, less long-lived processes.
That's a great word.
Work group.
Yeah, and we've been talking about that sort of more like project-based committees with a beginning and an end, because I think we have become a little bit too it's good to hear that that's been done more in the past too, because we've become a little bit married to this, committee structure, and then sometimes you have, if you want to look at any issue that could theoretically fall under the Conservation Commission or the Energy Committee, then there's this sort of, or the Parks and Rec, it's like, well, this should have come to the Parks and Rec Committee, and it ends up limiting the total amount of engagement. If we only go through these established committees that are there forever, new
You did
people
that
don't get an
Did that on
opportunity.
the planning board.
We did, yeah, and lots
We
of
did that when
times
I
it
was
was
on the
like,
planning
somebody
board.
would have a really big idea. Let's create whatever, a municipal park at this location. And you don't want to dive into it completely, but you want to at least find out a little bit about it, so you form a working group. A few people, very specific task, very short time period, come back, let us know. And if it turns out that there's real merit there, maybe at some point in the future, you might create a committee, but not initially. And then you don't have all this burdensome reporting and everything.
John?
One quick thing on this. You know, we were talking earlier about participation of people in the government. We do have a lot of committees where we have 26, something like that, and, well, more, and less. And so, but these are usually 5 to 8, 9 people per committee that are involved with the government in the interest areas that they want to be part of. But those are the folks that are core of this town. So you don't want to discourage them. So you want to make sure that they feel welcome and that you appreciate their input in the community.
I think that's
So we're
a,
going to change that word to shall?
From
Instead
shall
of
to
may
may.
instead-
To May.
which
Okay.
gives them the option, because it may be a committee that doesn't really need one. 'Cause the committee can come make a report to the select board, and you don't need the select board person doing that. Okay. And I like your suggestion, Auto, correction, we'll just have it just during a public meeting. Great. The change we made, and we had an interesting discussion about this on section 9 on that same page, we added the possibility that a part-time fire person could be on the select board. And I don't know who came up with that.
Well, it's been that way.
It had been that way,
Yeah.
but
But-
the old charter
what did the old
talked
charter
about a
say?
lot of employees at that time, 40
right.
years ago, who worked part-time from home. You know, that's kind of the way it was started, so there weren't administrative people in this building. And so, you know, in our work to just kind of tidy up that whole area, that's where we talked about the only thing that made sense would be somebody who was a part-time
Part-time.
firefighter.
Yeah, it did talk about part-time employees, but we made sure it could be a part-time fire person. Yes, Mark?
I spent a lot of time A-Bing, this with the old charter, and I thought that cleaned up this particular area really nicely, because it was pretty unclear about part-time jobs, and I thought specifically mentioning the Camden Fire Department, part-time jobs was a really good idea. Anything we can encourage there was great. I thought it was one of the things I saw that really made a lot of sense. And I think there are a lot of places where it's cleaned up, and I just want to make one other mention. I looked it up. Thank you, Larry, about the plantation information. Right now, Maine currently has organized 34 plantations and about 425 unincorporated townships, which is the level below plantation. And you go unincorporated township to plantation to towns, and it's still active today. So I learned something today. So thank you for that.
Most of them are way up north.
Yeah, it says it covers about half of the land of Maine is on
Which is way up
plantations.
north.
Yeah. So, anyway, I learned something. That was nice.
The next sort of big, well, let's say big change, but the next change we made, we enhanced the section in forfeiture of office. We're on page 5. It's under the section that begins on page 4, section 10. We had discussions, our current charter doesn't, actually says people don't leave aren't removed from the select board for attendance. But we had quite a bit of discussion about this and had some feedback from Bill Kelly. And felt like if there were unexcused absences within a period of time, that perhaps that person doesn't have, either for one reason or another, the ability to participate as seriously as you need a select board member to participate. And that's unexcused. That doesn't mean that, you know, you're sick, you have to go have surgery, and you're going to be recuperating for the next 6 weeks and you can't go. That is definitely what you would call inexcused absence. It's the
So I'm okay to leave.
no. Never.
Okay. And during this area, Deb has really been a workhorse on looking at other towns' charters. And we looked at a lot of other towns' views on this topic. And many of them went through some fairly formal processes. And we felt that that was really far too intrusive into somebody's personal life. So we wanted to just kind of stay on the edges of that.
And most of them, it's interestingly enough, most of the ones are 3 consecutive unexcused within 6 months. Some of them are 6 months, or some of them are 3 unexcused in the fiscal year. But that is a very common section in town charters.
And the filling of vacancies was cleaned up too.
Yeah,
because when Leonard passed here a few years ago, it wasn't real clear how that should be handled. So we were just trying to make it a little bit clearer should that unfortunate event ever happen again.
Well, the current one we have didn't say within what time period what time after a vacancy happens. That was left open. So we said that if you're going to fill it, based on the fact that there's X number of months to go, you need to fill it within 60 days. Bob?
Yeah, just maybe you could explain the second sentence of B3, which is, it says, an absence shall be excused by an affirmative vote over the majority vote of the other present and voting select board members. If somebody calls me on a day of a meeting is really sick, they don't get excused until we have a meeting?
No, you would, if they call you and they're really sick, and that night in the meeting, you say, so-and-so's really, really sick, and you all just, the remaining of you that are there, vote to excuse the absence.
Okay.
Now, you don't have to call a meeting to excuse the absence.
Right.
You excuse the absence at the meeting.
Okay.
But if that needs cleaning up a little bit, we can take a look at cleaning that language if it doesn't seem clear.
Yeah, I think it's a little unclear.
Have there, sorry.
But not huge.
Okay. Yes?
Have there been many times in the history of Camden Town government where there has been a strong desire to, or need to remove a select board member for such a reason, and the board has felt like they lacked a way to do that?
Yeah, I don't remember anybody being removed, but I do remember a select board member removing themselves right in the middle of a meeting. Just got up, walked out, and said, I'm done.
Well, sometimes maybe that's,
Not
And
bad.
that put me in that spot.
John, you had your hand up?
Yeah, but that was different. That's different from what
Yeah,
we're
that's
talking about.
different, Yeah.
But I don't recall anybody being asked to remove, but I think a lot of this was just to be consistent amongst all of the boards, the policy for unexcused absences.
Because we're applying it to, for instance, the plan, it applies to other committees as well, as you see in the section where it talks about boards and committees and their organization. Because you need people participating and being effective, and you would hope that if somebody is not able to come and participate for one reason or another, that they themselves would think about it and remove themselves from a board, the select board or the committee, but that might not happen, and so you may need a mechanism. I mean, we talked about this as well as recall, and we decided to not do recall, even though other towns have it, because that seems to be a political,
I saw it, it's item 4 on here. Recall is in
well,
there.
that's, I have to look that statute up.
I looked it up and it was recall.
Yeah, I can't remember. I thought we eliminated that. Has been recalled. We talked about it. We did talk about it, didn't we?
Yeah, we were not going to put anything in. We
Yeah,
probably
we
just did
did.
get stripped.
We were going to strip out the recall.
Well, that may have been a recall for like violation of ethics rights or ethics codes or something like that.
Yeah, I need,
Well,
We'll double check
we were
that.
really conscious, Allison, of not saying, okay, so-and-so hasn't voted for my policies for the last 4 meetings and I'm tired of it, therefore I want to get rid of it. That kind of stuff should never happen.
Yep.
But I think this was a recall for a real violation of either like an ethics code or a law or something like that.
we'll double check that.
Well, you were on the planning board, there was an issue with someone who was having problems making meetings.
Yeah, we had a very sick person on the planning board that probably missed, I don't know, 9 months' worth of meetings, and we were unable to replace them.
Yeah, and I could see that with the planning board more, I guess, because it's not, I guess there's something a little bit different to me about the ability to remove somebody that's been appointed. What makes me nervous about this excused, unexcused absences stuff, and I don't know, is that language in the charter currently at all? That,
Really.
I keep wanting to flick my finger to turn the page.
it feels like it is going to, the process of having to decide every time whether somebody has an excused or unexcused absence seems overly intrusive to me to say, well, sometimes I just think it's more appropriate to say, well, Taylor isn't here tonight, or, I think I missed one meeting or something. That was after my sister died. And to vote, to say, oh, we all have to vote, is Allison's absence excused or unexcused tonight in order to establish a record for some kind of future action that in the history of our town hasn't been very likely, it seems like it would create, I don't like the feeling of that.
I think the intent was that this wouldn't be triggered until there were 3 consecutive events.
Yeah,
And then you'd have to go back?
well, then you'd know.
Yeah, I mean, it's, hey,
But you would, but that
I
still
can't
means
come
you'd have to
tonight because
vote.
I've got the flu. You don't need to vote about that. But if all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 and there are questionable reasons, I didn't come because I would rather, I don't know, go camping or whatever it is, then I think you could make a determination based on that, because you don't want to clutter up the meeting with talking about people's individual health issues or.
There's some places where it's just determined by the select board, the select board chair, but then the select board chair explains the absence and then everybody votes on it. We tried to keep it inobtrusive, but perhaps it's not inobtrusive enough. Mark?
I think it makes sense for, if somebody's missing 3 consecutive meetings, it makes sense. My problem is having it a public vote in a public meeting, because that does become intrusive. And it's if there was a way, because here it doesn't say it's after 3 meetings, it just says an absence will be accused. So the way it reads now, it's like, okay, Allison has the flu, we have to vote whether that's okay for her to be gone. I think there may be a better way, maybe it's a discussion between the chairman and the vice chairman, or something where we're aware there's perhaps a problem, but there's a better way to do it. Maybe if it's even an executive session, if it becomes a problem.
Deb?
Yeah, John?
I agree with Allison, and I think we're making this bigger than we need to. I think it's up to responsibility to the select board member that's not going to be there to notify the chair that they're not going to be there. That's it. And if they're not going to be there, it's always put in the minutes who's present and who's not. So you got a record of who's there and who's not. So if you get 3, then you could bring them in. I don't care how you do it, talk to them, say, or the chair have a coffee with them and sit down and say, okay, what's going on? And let's talk about making some meetings. And if you can't come around after that, then you may do something with it. But I mean, I think that's the best way to handle it. The other thing is, I know none of you remember that it used to have the select board's attendance in the front of the town report
And it's
every
supposed
year.
to, according
And I
to
do
our
not
charter.
recall why it came out.
It's actually I fuss about this every year a little bit because it's in our charter. And
Yeah.
that is the mechanism that they, whatever wisdom that was done, I do not know. But I've always kind of liked it, that it just said the only thing that's in there about all of this is that its attendance record is going to be printed in the town report. And that is, to me, the alert to the residents to use that information to make their next decision about
Who
who
to
to
vote
vote
for.
for. And if the residents decide that attendance really matters, then they have a way, I mean, they're going to notice also along the way, probably too, but it just doesn't seem like a huge problem. And the,
May-
But it can be a huge problem, especially if you're into a very controversial topic and you need everybody there. Because a lot of times decisions don't get made because the whole group isn't there. So you postpone the decision saying, okay, when so-and-so is here next week, we'll have that vote. And so next week comes around and somebody else is sick. So, I mean, eventually you're going to have to say, okay, we got to do something.
I mean, but I think
know.
peer pressure is a lot more effective in that
Well, that's what.
area.
yes.
That's what has worked, I mean, that's what works, really.
Mark? Looks like
Maybe you just need something as simple as after 3 missed consecutive meetings, unexcused, simplify it so that then the select board should examine or act on the situation or something. Just make it a simpler notation that if for 3 unexcused absences, consecutive absences, something needs to be done. I don't know what the terminology would be doing, but you could make it simpler without saying you need to vote on the absence and so on and so forth.
Well, I think there needs to be a way to stress that attendance at select board meetings, planning board meetings, all of the committees, is important because committees and boards can't function if you don't have the regular attendance of the majority, the people that are there. So this is to address that issue. Taylor?
I agree with having something in here. I think we all hope that the likelihood of ever having to use a mechanism like this is probably never going to happen because it hasn't at this point. But I do think it'd be better to have something so that if, we are in some world where after just being elected into office, say perhaps someone is super stubborn and doesn't want to take it upon themselves to remove themselves and just doesn't show up, it really encumbers a board of 5 people if you're meeting with 4 in that hypothetical and don't have the ability to correct that. But I agree with Allison and John. I think the way I look at this, nobody wants to vote every night that someone's not there, whether it's excused or not. I think that's an unnecessary procedure. To me, this simply says that when it becomes painfully obvious that somebody is not upholding their duties, then the select board can say, okay, we're going to start using this and voting because this person hasn't made 5 meetings in a row. So now we're going to vote, and once we hit the 3rd one on this vote, that person can be held accountable. To me, it's like, it's a tool that can be used, but doesn't need to be used until the board decides to do that in a circumstance that's, again, painfully obvious is what I see that, where I see that taking effect.
Well, it looks like we'll take another look at this.
Just, can I throw this out there for a minute? Correct me if I'm wrong, but Audra, you're the HR manager for the town? What would you think if, instead of calling the chair of the select board, a select person that wasn't going to be able to make a meeting, contacted Audra and said, here's the reason. You know, I have the flu, I'm going to my grandmother's birthday, whatever it is. And Audra would know, because she's an HR professional, what excused absences and unexcused absences are. And you would have the privacy that all she's got to say to the board is, so-and-so can't make it tonight, and they had an excused absence. And then you move on, and if there gets to be 3 or more in a row, then it becomes an issue for the select board to possibly take action.
Taylor?
Just my gut on that, I think that would put the town manager in a difficult
I was
position.
just going to say.
Same here.
Yeah, a political, position.
Audra, for
is
the
different
people
than an
listening from home.
administrative and-
Right.
Microphone.
Yeah, somebody who's sort of elected politically by the citizenry is different than an employee that I've hired to do a job, and I'd treat it very differently, and it'd put me in a position where I'm making a judgment call on 1/5 of my bosses.
Okay.
Well, we'll take another look.
Great.
Good issues, guys.
In terms of select board attendance, it seems like this would be an appropriate part of the charter, perhaps, to deal with the very difficult issue that we're currently dealing with, which is remote meetings, virtual participation. It's the elephant in the room that I feel somewhat of a need to say that it feels a little bit like a metaphor for town government in general, the fact that we're all talking about the future of our form of government, and we're sitting here in the Opera House when the rest of the world is participating over Zoom. This is highly inflexible. I personally came very close to not being able to come tonight because yesterday I had a scratchy throat, and I thought, shoot, I have been wanting to come to this meeting for a really long time, but is this the beginning of a cold? Is this the beginning of something? Is it going to be worse tomorrow? And then I'm going to be in this difficult position of, okay, even if I'm not so scared about my own person, it's very irresponsible of me to go into the town office going, I hope I don't have COVID. And so I scrambled. Most of my afternoon yesterday was spent on hold trying to beg them to give me a COVID test yesterday and not today, because I knew that if I started to feel worse, I was going to be sort of like this ethical dilemma. And with the guidance now, what we're seeing with the schools, also, kids getting colds, the guidance is that if you don't know, you're supposed to stay home. And if you have a sick kid at home, you need to stay home. Before all this, I could have, if I needed to, I could have brought my kids down here. Now, I would feel irresponsible doing that. And so, in terms of getting more people to be able to participate, I think we have to recognize that just this mechanism that we're using right now, although I love being able to chat with people and have that face-to-face before and after, and I think a lot of good comes from that. Bob and I are arguing about this constantly, but we should address that issue maybe in the charter.
Well, there's nothing in the charter that says all of the meetings have to be, we're not saying you can't have a meetings electronically.
Okay.
We're not saying you can't. I don't think it.
No, it doesn't, but maybe we should, maybe there should be guidance about it being okay. So even before the pandemic, it would have been unheard of to say, I think I'll just call into the select board meeting. And it's been an argument that's come up in the past. Is it illegal? Is it not illegal? maybe, I mean, maybe it belongs in the charter and maybe it's better, or maybe it's better that it's just, we're just silent on that issue, but
Sounds like a policy for the select board to determine. Is that what you were going to say, John?
Well, that, and it's also maybe part of the discussion with the emergency procedures that we need to have to talk about. I think is when we get back to normal, that we should be back to meeting in person, because that gives opportunity, people come into the office, into the meetings, and have a conversation with their elected officials. But as far as the Zoom meetings go, I have no problem with that, but maybe that needs to be put in, like I said, with some kind of powers of emergency. Who knows where that's gonna go? There's gonna be all kinds of positions, but, the attendance thing is where we started with this. All that used to be was the 24 regular scheduled select board meetings, and then all the extras were never really counted. It was those 24 meetings, that's what they would refer the attendance to in the book.
26.
Everything else is special. So I know I wandered
right, I mean, it
around.
sounds like we do have different feelings. There are different feelings in this town about whether if things need to be in person, or maybe even whether, some of us feel that there needs to be a requirement that allows virtual access, that you shouldn't have to come down and be here physically present in order to be able to give a video or a verbal presentation of your feelings on something. Right now, somebody that can't, or before all of this, in a normal pre-pandemic, it was that if you weren't able to be there, you had the option of submitting, written comments. But right, for the same reason that some people are screaming right now, saying, and actually not very many of them, but wanting to be able to just go into the select board meeting room and say their piece during public comment, and now feeling frustrated that they are being required to give written comments, and I don't think that should be the case either. We may want to include something that provides, access, so that the mother that is at home with a sick child has the same opportunity to actually use their voice in a public meeting as somebody who
But
can
does that
attend in
really
person.
need to be in the charter? That is a process, and it would take a system that could be set up and be a select board policy. I don't think it needs to be in the charter to allow.
I do think that you might want to consider what Allison is saying in terms of remote meetings and participation, because
In the charter.
the major barrier to this has always been state statute around remote participation. And that was part of when the pandemic started and there were all those executive orders issued by the governor. The reason that we're all able to meet on Zoom now and other, remote platforms is because of what's in that executive order. But I guess layering on top of that, there were some municipalities that believed that they were covered because they had things about remote participation or teleconferencing or whatever in some sort of ordinance or other, sort of legal, like,
Right.
they have the ability through home rule to do it, I guess, is my point. So
Well,
I think
we-
it's worth given everything that we've
Sure.
been through, everything that we know now, and I guess what we're seeing in terms of, what might be a way to open things up in the future for people. I just think it's good for you to think about it, and I think it is something that does have a place in the charter, given that long conversation in Maine around remote participation.
And that's a really good thing for us to go to Bill Kelly with some, particularly with some suggested language on how to handle that. But I want to make sure that it's flexible enough that not everybody is going to have the capability of the remote access, just as say not everybody has the capability of coming in person.
Yep.
And it needs to be flexible enough, and the systems have to be available for it to be flexible enough for people to access remotely. I mean, I would hate to see where all meetings have to be remote, because there would be some people that cannot participate. They can't watch YouTube and type into their laptop in the chat section so Jeremy Martin or somebody can report in the planning board meeting, oh, Joe Blow has just asked this question. I mean, so
Yeah, and
it
I
would
don't
need
think
to be
that that's the right
open-ended.
system. Just to be clear, I don't think that the way it's being done right now is the way it should be done. So just to be,
I think the language would have to be flexible and vague, just having some enabling language that would enable access by, and this is definitely a
Yeah,
BK.
I mean, we've only had Zoom for a year or two.
Yeah.
And no doubt in 5 years, we're going to have a whole lot better programs than we have now available. And one of the things that we have discussed is all of our meetings are supposed to be public meetings of the Charter Commission. These are public committee meetings. But when we meet in this room, the door at the bottom of the stairs is locked. Nobody else can get in.
So it's the YouTube
So has that
portion.
ceased being a public meeting if nobody can get in?
yes.
Okay, so
Does YouTube
what do we
count
do
as
about that?
public
How do we
meeting?
handle that?
Are you guys monitoring the comments on YouTube during the meeting?
No, we don't have the
No,
capability.
We don't have the YouTube capability.
We don't have the,
All you have to do is log in. Anybody can do it. I monitor, when I watch, you're not missing a bunch of comments, by the way, but,
I've seen some that, from the planning board, and they were rude.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, you need to have
Yeah.
somebody technical on board that can do that. Taylor, had your hand up, you've been patient.
Yeah, I think Allison has a good point. The pandemic has been as frustrating as it's been equally interesting in looking at how forcing us to use remote meetings affects public input and even just the input of the regular boards. I think that I'm personally not in favor of a world where nobody meets in person anymore and we do everything remotely, but I think having that capability available mixed with what our current system is definitely something interesting and worth considering. So maybe it is, I'd be curious to hear what Bill Kelly's comments are. Maybe it's just something as simple as, remote access to meetings is allowed at the discretion of the select board. Something, flexible and vague that gives us the ability to do that where we see it fit.
And making sure that it stays within the guidelines of the state statutes as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a BK.
I have to take my leave tonight. I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, and I'm looking forward
Thanks,
to the
Tim.
next time we get to talk.
Make a list.
Is this excused?
We can vote on it, I guess.
This is
if
not
you
a
want.
select board meeting.
It's not a select board meeting, he's safe.
See you later, Taylor.
So I think if we do something, it would possibly go in the procedures for select board meetings. Or actually in a section where it could apply to any meetings, as long as the town has the technical capabilities of being able to do that for every committee, which it really doesn't have at the current time, which is an issue that we have. We have one person who doesn't have the technical capability to participate except by phone, and can't do a Zoom in person, but can do a Zoom on phone. We have some person that doesn't want to come in and would like to participate. So the hybrid version that you guys use for the select board meetings, where some people are in and some people are out, would be very helpful. But I understand it's a very cumbersome system, so it would be sort of incumbent upon you guys to fund or find a better way of being able to have a hybrid system for meetings. This is probably not the time to discuss what that would be.
Don't worry.
Okay.
But just on a side note, I would be very happy to volunteer my time to help make Zoom work better for you guys. I just enjoy this topic. But the only other thing is I think talking with Bill Kelly is exactly what needs to happen, because we have repeatedly gotten in an argument. Bill told us maybe last year at one point that if we really needed to, we could actually have a select board member call in to vote, to participate. And all of us were like, what did I just hear? What? This is before the pandemic. And, talking to the Rockport chair, she, swears that's not the case. And so having Bill Kelly just clear that up would be helpful. And then to put it in the charter, possibly in some way that could clarify it for us to avoid so much of the confusion in the future.
Can I,
Yes, John?
so you're saying that Bill said it was okay for a member to call in?
Yes, and he said, and it's not recommended, and I don't recommend it, but you should know that if you really needed to, you could. And I was Does everybody else remember?
I remember.
But that's,
I,
he's changed his tune, because he's never said that before. It always had to be present to vote.
well,
no
I
matter
always
what
felt
the
like, why
meeting-
didn't you tell us this before? But I mean, I don't, you can see it, I have it somewhere written too, but
But
perfect
anyway,
job for you guys.
Okay.
I believe that the member should be present. If it's, if it's a vote, should be there, whether it's planning board, select board, zoning board of appeals, whatever it is. You're dealing with town business, you need to be there to vote,
physically,
physically.
Physically.
I disagree, but that's what this is for, so.
So anyway,
Okay.
we didn't make very far, Deb.
No, not yet. We got more to go. I think we're going to have to schedule another one, another
Yeah.
one of these. One of the things we have done, if you keep on going, I'm trying to hit another highlight, on page 6, on quorum and voting. A lot of times in the section, it talks about 3/5 of the members need to approve. And if you have 4 people there, doing the math on 3/5, it's just, So we went with 3 instead of trying to say 3/5. It just seems clearer to us, and that no action of the board shall be binding unless adopted by an affirmative vote, at least 3 members. So if there are only 3 there, 3 have to be for it, is what we're saying here. Because all of a sudden, if 2 out of 5 are approving something, you're having a minority of the select board approving something.
Deb,
Yeah, Mark?
I think it's a great idea. I really like the idea of, if there's 3 people have to vote positively. I think it clarifies, and I think it's an important decision. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
Isn't that already in our charter?
No,
It
there
wasn't
were,
very- I don't
I
think
know,
there were
'cause
probably
Bob,
8
I know,
different
doesn't
ways
like
to
it.
describe how votes would take place.
there.
And we said,
Yeah.
let's make it all the same. Anything requires 3 votes to be approved by the select board.
That's the way it is now.
That is the way it is now.
Yeah, but it
Well,
says 3/5 part of the time.
But the
So
way you
we're
do it isn't
wrong.
necessarily the way it is in
Standardizing
the
it.
charter.
I totally agree with the, yeah.
3/5 is like, that's nuts.
Yeah, I
You're
think
supposed
it
to
was,
have
it
roll
was,
call votes now, but you don't have any,
Yeah.
There's just some stuff in the charter that we don't follow.
yeah,
Vice
this
versa.
clarifies it. It's in there,
Yeah.
but this makes it real simple and clarifies it because, and I think it's really good.
There are 1 or 2 instances where it does talk about if for some strange reason, 2 of the select board members are out of office for some reason, then it can be a majority of those remaining. And Bill Kelly was the one who helped us with that language and I can't tell you right now exactly what section that's in.
It's on
But-
booting somebody for not attending.
Well, that's.
I mean, that's one of the places.
That's one of the
where-
places, but there could be a tragic incident where only 3 select board members remain. There are 2 vacancies. And then there's a little bit of a change, but I can't point out exactly where that is. Section 13, general and administrative, there's a word missing that's supposed to say general and administrative ordinances. So there's really no change there. It's the emergency ordinances section that I know that you all have a little bit of frustration with. We actually tried to expand that a little bit to give you all some flexibility when there's, an emergency, and it didn't make the cut, our language didn't make the cut through Bill Kelly. But since then, I found some additional language in another charter that gives the town select board some flexibility in the case of an emergency when it comes to emergency appropriations. So that's something we're going to want to get some feedback from Bill Kelly on, and then we will share that with the whole commission hasn't had a chance to discuss it. We'll get some feedback from Bill, and we'll send that out to you for your comments on. But I think there's some way to give you some more flexibility in emergencies that's not here that may pass muster. So I think there's something more we can do there.
It's not a huge area of concern for me, but in terms of appropriations, because we already have select board contingency available, I
Right.
see the issue as more the general lack of flexibility in, the things that can happen without a town meeting vote. So, I don't,
Doesn't bother you one way or the other.
no, because I haven't found that we've been in a situation where we haven't been able to come up with money for something. I mean, we have enough, it hasn't been money so much as things that we would be able to do. I don't know, but maybe I'm not.
Well,
Thinking of-
we'll present some language to Bill and get his feedback, and then the commission will discuss it as a whole, and then we'll get it back to you guys for your
Yeah.
feedback.
Deb, on the emergency thing.
You
are
might want to move your microphone closer.
Sorry, Deborah. On the emergency, is the language that's in here going to be changed? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I'm saying that this may get
Yeah, because
enhanced.
as I read it, and you still have the requirement to go to the legislature, the town vote.
Right.
That's how much of an emergency going to be if I have to call a town vote.
Right, it's difficult.
You're right, so look at that.
Yeah,
Deb?
that's some of the language I've seen doesn't have that requirement in it.
Good, thanks.
And that's with a town meeting form of government, not a hybrid form of government. So that's something we can pursue.
Thanks.
And we just added a section 16 about including an electronic form of the codes of Camden, because that isn't in there now.
Deb,
Yeah.
I'd recommend we kind of redo both section 15 and 16,
Okay,
just
Section
because
15.
15, that's not practically how it works.
Oh,
And 16,
well,
and I won't get into too much procedurally tonight how it works and why it works the way it does now, but it doesn't work that way, and I don't think it's ever practically going to work that way.
would you
Yeah.
send us some language?
Yep.
That would be very helpful.
Sure.
I know that the codification of ordinances has never been, this is from the original charter, and that was never done. There are ways of doing that. It's not free necessarily, but E-Code 360 is a system that many towns use in Maine, many towns throughout the country use to create this organized, unified code. But if you would send us language on 15 and 16, that would be great. I think you're up.
It's also 7:30.
It's 7:30, I know.
Okay.
Do you
I'm
think
up.
we can do Article 3?
Yeah, Article 3 is pretty small.
We're going to do Article
This-
3.
this-
We may need to try to reschedule another one of these to go through, because we have some substantive things to talk about, the Personnel Board, the Budget Committee, and it's, almost 7:30, and we do need to wrap up and have a discussion amongst ourselves about next meeting dates and how we're going to do public input. So we'll do Article 3.
Article 3 really isn't a lot of new stuff. What it is it reflects the consolidation and the alignment and the matching that went on, because in the previous charter, town manager responsibilities were kind of scattered around the charter, so we thought it would make sense, just like in the select board, to have them in one location. And the other thing we tried to do was that we found some inconsistencies, particularly in terms of long-term planning. There were some groups within the town that were supposed to make, I'm going to make up the numbers a little bit, were supposed to make the long-term plans for, say, 5 years. Someplace else would say 7 years, someplace else would say 10 years. So that was part of what was included in here, is to get all those to match. So you don't have one department working on a plan that's a 10-year plan and another department working on a plan that would tie in with that's a 6-year plan, for instance. But there really were not any significant changes in the town manager area.
I think, for instance, like number 4, under powers and duties in B, establish and supervise an ongoing interdepartmental planning and review program, wasn't even listed in this section as one of the town manager's duty. It was over in Article 4. Well, that's an example of bringing something that seems pretty specific responsibility to make sure it's in one place.
yes, there's so much of that kind of, sorry, I don't know if I did better. So much of that kind of thing in the charter, and it's kind of amazing that you guys have been willing to look at that for free, and
And I
because it's
think
just not that much fun to
This,
go through.
like Allison, this section, Article 3, if we were to do an annotated version of that, there would be little blue and red lines all over the place, telling
Right, it's
people.
a challenge because so much has been moved around. that-
Yeah, people would be, the annotated version would be 5 pages long, and it would completely confuse people.
And I don't think this is actually the kind of thing that would require annotation, because it's just, it's not changing what's being done, it's just rearranging.
Right, yeah, I don't know what the perfect way to do it is. I don't think that needs it. And it would make it look like a change, if it were just the track changes turned on, it would make it look like some kind of massive change
Oh.
that really wasn't. So,
Yeah, recently we've stopped looking at some of these revisions with the track changes on, because it's hard to follow the language. Was that new?
I enjoyed the conversation about Roman numerals and all of that. It was very thorough, I mean,
Well, we haven't really, I mean, this is the format as the old one is, and, you look at other charters and other people have other ways of outlining them. E-code has a different method of outlining them too.
yeah.
Okay, I guess
Can I,
that's,
can I ask, does our town manager have anything to say about this?
yeah.
I like that I can look in one section and find everything that I'm supposed to do there. So thank you for consolidating it all in one
I
place.
think, I think, we left you, your role in the budget process under budget, because it made more sense to have all of the budget process together, and the personnel responsibilities in the personnel administrative section. But other than that, I think we brought everything in here.
Yes, and you did a good job with it in Article 2. I know there's a lot you pulled from lots of different places there, too.
The part about
Yeah?
the part about disability and absence, I'm not sure if that's different than it is now. Does it currently say that the town manager the select board needs to approve the, replace, like if when Audra in the past has designated Randy as, does it currently say that we need select board approval in order for the town manager to designate authority to somebody else? Or is that a new thing?
That's the way it's always been.
I'm just asking.
I don't think we changed
I
that.
don't think we changed it,
I don't
because
think we
since
changed
technically the town manager is employed by and serves under the select board, it would make sense that if the town manager had an automobile accident, was going to be out for 2 months, that the select board would have the right and the responsibility to approve a temporary fill-in.
I like that. It would, hopefully, you hire a town manager and you trust that they would check in with the select board before just designating their authority to somebody else. But I do like the idea that it's in there specifically.
The very next section is one that I think we probably would have a more substantive discussion about, and I'll just briefly talk about it. The administrative organization had a different Part A. Most of that old Part A has been put in either Article 2 in the Select Board or Article 3, which left personnel becoming Part A. Nothing that was in the old Part A has been deleted, it's just moved. Part A is now Personnel Administration, and we sort of reversed the order. The Personnel Board came before the Personnel Director, and we really felt like we wanted to state up front that the Personnel Director was the town manager, so that was more logical. But what we've done since then is a huge overhaul. And as I said in the note to you, and we've got the note here, this is still under discussion. We're asked for additional feedback from Bill Kelly about whether the Personnel Board, how the Personnel Board could evolve from being a board to a committee, because board members are currently elected. And we're waiting some feedback. And how do you eliminate it? If you eliminate the Personnel Board from the charter, how do you make sure that there's a committee that then may take its place? Without going into the discussions of the pros and cons, I do want to call your attention to the duties of the Personnel Board, and that was written by the Personnel Board. And I think they did an excellent job, and if you notice, they really changed their role to advisory. We completely shortened this whole section because the Personnel Board no longer establishes, because the Personnel Policy Manual has already established, so that's why that section is so short. The old charter, the Personnel Board established everything, but that was done when you created the policy manual. So the issue is, does it stay elected? Does it stay a board? Does it become a committee that's appointed by the select board? And Bill Kelly has just sent us some language that we would like to discuss as a group and then get back to you on that one as well, if that's all right with you guys.
So we're not gonna talk about it tonight.
No, we're not going to talk about it tonight because it is 7:33.
Okay.
I just wanted to alert them and alert you guys. We have gotten some more feedback from Bill on language about changing the personnel committee. So I think we need to discuss that as a group and get that language out to everybody.
You had a great discussion at your meeting. I listened to that whole thing. So I would say I'm on the get rid of it side, just to put that out there.
Can we talk now about how this group will be able to have public information meetings? We can have, I think, 50 in here, including us, which means 40 out there, because Juniper, I think, counts as one of the 50 people, and any other staff. So as we move forward in wanting to bring people in, is the 50 people your guideline, or is it a state guideline?
State.
It's changed. It was 50, they moved it to 100, the state moved it to 100, but the Opera House has decided to keep it at 50 to keep it
Correct.
safe for everybody.
Correct.
I'm sorry, currently, keep
He's
it,
correct. Mark's correct.
The Opera House has decided to keep it at 50 to keep it safe for everybody.
Right.
The state actually moved to bigger numbers, but we're uncomfortable with that.
Correct.
I think that's fine.
well, we might be thrilled to have 40
Yeah, I don't.
40 people
yeah.
come, and I suppose to accommodate that, one of the things we could do is require people to sign up. And if we have 135 sign up, then we'll have to schedule another meeting. Allison?
One of the things that's a topic for discussion and possible action on, I think on our next select board agenda, will be the topic of whether it's appropriate for committees to be meeting in person at this time. The last official action that was taken by the select board was that committees needed to meet virtually. And we haven't had a full discussion of the board since then. I feel very strongly that if the purpose of getting public input on the charter revisions is to bring in new people that maybe have been not involved, that there's no reason that it can't be done virtually. Every Rotary Club in America just look at even just the 2 Rotary clubs that are here. They have meetings with many people that are working very well. My kids did virtual classes. It is happening all over the place. The town of Lincolnville had a workshop with 30 people over Zoom, and all the feedback that I got was that it was excellent. So I know that this is a little bit of a soapbox issue for me, and that I could go on and on, but
Well, I think as we move forward, I think learning how we can do that effectively would require technical help that is not sitting up here at all, the 9 of us, and having run a couple of Zoom meetings for the charter as well as for the design team. Many times, the person who is the chair of a meeting cannot be preoccupied by trying to figure out whose mic needs to be turned off and turned on, and if it's also on YouTube, who's following the chats and the questions. So it would take technical support and some planning. If you change, well, we'll look forward to hearing from you what your further guidance is on that.
I think you're absolutely right. It really takes somebody else that is in tuned and knowing how the meeting is supposed to work and listening to the chair and kind of coordinating on the side to be in charge of all of that part of looking at the waiting room, monitoring comments, figuring out how the comments are going to go, and that it's impossible to be doing that while actually chairing the
And
meeting.
I think
So-
that the thing all of us who are in the public sphere need to be very cautious of is inadvertently stepping on somebody's toes that's trying to participate. You know, we don't want somebody to come back 3 weeks after a meeting and say, hey, I was trying to get in and they kept blocking me, they kept muting me, whatever. That would be a real mess. So it's very important that we let anyone who wants to come and offer an opinion have the ability to speak. And how do we do that fairly? And also, we need to think about doing these things promptly, because our current schedule anticipates having this complete by the end of March,
To have it in your hands.
which would allow it to be on the June warrant, okay? If we're unable to meet that schedule, then we're going to need another extension,
To November.
because it'll be on the November ballot. And it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen with the disease and everything, but we need to be conscious about getting everybody to participate, but also having your foot on the accelerator just a little bit, so we continue to move forward.
Right now, people with kids in the schools are, and I'll only speak for myself, but we are getting emails constantly from the school system begging us to be as careful as possible outside of school. And that they're working so hard to make sure that everything, all the risks are minimized so that in-person learning can continue. And today, we just had, I think that was the biggest increase in, was it the most new cases ever since it started in Maine? So I'm personally seeing a lot of fear, especially from people that have kids and are trying to figure out, kids and grandparents and how they can just I've gotten so many emails from parents saying, we are going to cancel this play date is canceled because I now feel like we really need to lock down. And I really wonder about the wisdom of whether it's possible to do a really good job of this right now before March. And that, is there a benefit to making sure something can get on the ballot in June, or would we all be better served by continuing this discussion and letting it, happen?
I think what we have to do is set a public information session up when we feel comfortable we've hammered more of this out, and see how it works. And if we're able to get participation, and if we're able to manage it, and if not, then we have to think of another approach.
Yep.
Okay, thank you all. I think it's obvious, if we get a combined list from you guys, that would be great. What we'll do is we have to take a look at our schedule. I think we could get back together to talk about more things in person, but send us your list in the meantime. And you're going to be sending us some language, and we'll be checking in on some items with BK. And what we need to do as a group is decide about our next meeting. So thank you all.
Can I just a quick thing? It's really hard to try to limit all comments to a joint. I don't know that theoretically the select board's opinion on any of this isn't any more valuable than we don't have any, we're just the public, really. But it's a courtesy that you're, giving us a little bit more.
Well, I
Wait,
would,
and I guess, could select board members just be considered, just as any member of the public could watch those YouTube videos and send
Sure.
something? I guess I'd rather my comments even, I can share them publicly or whatever too with the rest of the select board, but just being able to send things directly to you guys, I think,
But remember, we send it to Janice with a
Right,
request to
sorry. Yes,
forward
yes,
it to,
yes, yes.
and because we have a member who does not have a computer, Janice needs to fax it to that person. So we have a technically person who doesn't have much technology in their home.
Can we go over the full list of how many members of the Charter Commission are not here right now?
Three.
Sorry.
Okay, and that's Jean White.
She's at
Yeah.
home on YouTube.
She's watching us on YouTube right
Oh, and
now.
you don't have to tell me like what the reason is.
Oh,
for
and
each of
Nancy
the-
Caudle Johnson and Mark Haskell.
Right, okay.
Mark's hunting.
Mouse
Mouse
shooting
hunt, yeah.
moose, yeah.
All right, so thank you all very much. Yes, Bob, you have a
No,
closing
I
comment?
thought you did say we could send direct comments without
Yeah.
having,
But
as
we'd
long as,
rather you
Janice.
send it to Janice, so
right,
she'll
as
distribute
long
it.
as we didn't do multiple emails from each of us.
Right.
Yeah, let's not get one a day for the next 15 days.
All right.
And we'll let you guys know when our next meeting is.
Yep.
So if you can try to get those your ideas to us, 4 or 5 days before the meeting, so we have a chance
What are you
to
thinking,
read them
Deb,
and
for a
digest them,
date?
that would be really helpful.
Oh, okay, so if we're going to be not Zooming, Tuesday the 10th, which is next week, there will be no Juniper, so it would be better not to try to do an Opera House meeting. We could Zoom it on the 10th.
Tuesday, the 10th is in 2 weeks.
It's, right.
That's not firm.
What?
That's not firm.
Well, we don't want to change your life. The other alternative is Wednesday, November 11th. There's no Opera House, but we could do a Zoom. And Bill-
That's a holiday.
The 11th
Yeah.
is?
It's Veterans
Veterans
Day.
Day.
It's Veterans Day.
So Wednesday, the 18th, we could do Opera House or Zoom.
Just want to make sure that you're okay that we're still live streaming. Do you want me to stop the live?
Oh, well,
Yes.
Yes.
sure, that would be fine. Thank you, Juniper. Goodbye, everybody who's watching.